My name is Cora Bennett, 35 years old, a biomedical engineer living in Seattle. But don't let the title fool you. I'm the one who built the artificial intelligence foundation that turned Bennett Rhodes into the leading healthcare empire in America. The only thing is, they never once mention my name. That evening was my father's 65th birthday party, held at our family estate in Virginia. While my brother Lucas stood under the glittering lights, raising his glass like some kind of medical deity, the one who made it all possible, was leaning against the bar, a shadow in my own life. I happened to overhear my father say, "All flowed her shares." Before we announced the sale. I stepped forward quietly. I heard that. He didn't respond. He simply walked over and shoved me down hard onto the marble floor. Blood streamed down my forehead. "I'll erase you from this family tree." What he didn't know was that I had already bought back every piece of that empire, with my silence. What would you do if your whole family conspired to erase you from their lives? Leave a comment if you've ever been dismissed, even when you were the one who built the value. Tap like if you believe silence can sometimes be the loudest strike. And don't forget to follow this channel, because the story I'm about to tell isn't just about revenge. It's about taking back power. I was born the eldest in the Bennett family, a name that grew louder with every financial headline. But from a young age I learned one thing. My worth existed only when I was quiet and useful. My father, Richard Bennett, was the founder of Bennett Rhodes, a company that started with medical devices and later evolved into a research giant specializing in artificial intelligence for medical diagnostics. He was brilliant, ambitious, and treated everything like a chessboard, one only he knew the rules to. My mother, Emily, was different. Gentle, sharp, she was the first to notice that I didn't like talking much but could analyze complex systems when I was just 8 years old. She taught me to channel loneliness into focus, to observe the world from behind the scenes, and she was the only one who ever called me the quiet architect. I lost her when I was 16. A car accident on a rainy night. The report called it loss of control on a slick curve. But the empty look in my father's eyes at the funeral, and how he had her room cleared out the very next morning, left a cold hollow in me that never quite healed. After that, everything changed. I was moved to live in the lower level of the main house, a space that once belonged to the old housekeeping staff. Meanwhile, Lucas, only 13 then, was taken to his first board meeting. My father introduced him proudly, "My son, the heir." I did well in school, earned a full scholarship to Stanford for bioengineering, and went on to get my master's at MIT, where I drafted the first lines of code for an early cancer detection AI system, the one that would later become Bennett Rhodes' most acclaimed innovation. I sent the first prototype home to my father. No thank you. No reply. Just a short email from his assistant. Concept viable. Forwarded to internal engineering for further development. No attribution necessary. My name was never included in the research reports. When the Wall Street Journal first published an article about the breakthrough AI, it credited Lucas Bennett, the young visionary transforming healthcare with artificial intelligence. I just sat in my small apartment near Cambridge, reading it in silence, living off scholarships and late-night freelance gigs. Once, during a rare family gathering, Lucas pointed at a revenue growth chart and joked, "Who would have thought engineering could pull this off, huh?" I just nodded. Didn't react. My father didn't look at me once the entire dinner. My younger sister, Madeline, 8 years my junior, landed the cover of Forbes at 22. The media darling of modern healthcare, they called her. She was beautiful, eloquent, effortlessly charming, perfect for the image my father wanted. I once watched her host a tech conference last year, dressed in a white suit, walking confidently through camera flashes, never having to worry about a single line of code breaking behind the curtain. I didn't resent them. I wasn't jealous. But I felt like a footnote erased from the family blueprint. Present, but never acknowledged. I kept working. I developed AI solutions that helped reduce breast cancer misdiagnosis rates to nearly 4%. I built algorithms that tracked post-surgical recovery through personalized data. But every project I completed, Lucas took credit. Every patent, my father held the rights. One day, I was summoned back to headquarters in Richmond for a system security review. They said there was a glitch in the hospital coordination software I'd helped build. I flew back carrying my old laptop and access badge, the one I thought had been deactivated. When I arrived, my office was a dusty room near the archive. No nameplate. No one called me lead engineer or systems director. They just said, "This is the tech support room. You can work here." Through the foggy glass, I saw Madeline walk by with a group of investors. Lucas stood among them, smiling, saying something that made them all laugh. What I felt wasn't pain. It was clarity. A realization. I could stay silent forever. And I would never have a place in this family. That night, back at the hotel, I opened my old archive folder. Inside an early sketch I had once sent to my mother, I found a handwritten note from her, the blue ink barely visible. "Cora, if no one sees you, let yourself become the light." I sat there for a long time. Silent. Then I started planning. A quiet, meticulous plan. No flashbulbs, no begging for credit from those who had erased me. I wouldn't take back my name with tears. I would reclaim everything, by showing them they needed me more than I ever needed them. I returned to Bennett Road's headquarters on a crisp early fall morning under the same pretense: security system audit, requested by the executive operations team. No one explained clearly, only mentioned there might be a permissions bug in an old algorithm I had once designed. I sat in the freezing basement room, opened the internal console and scanned the system logs. But within the first hour I realized it wasn't my code malfunctioning, it was the company's money. A strange script flashed in the log entries, leading to a chain of encrypted transactions disguised as temporary redirects. At first I assumed it was a glitch. But as I decrypted each segment, I uncovered hundreds of thousands of dollars being fragmented and funneled to shell corporations registered in Nevada, Delaware, and parts of the British Virgin Islands. The deeper I dug, the more I saw. A financial structure webbed together to launder money or offload assets. I didn't alert anyone. Didn't call. I didn't file a report. Instead, I shut down the system, removed the backup drive, and took it home to my apartment in Seattle. That night, alone in my small kitchen, the glow of the laptop reflecting off a glass of water I hadn't touched, I sat still. Part of me didn't want to believe it. But another part, the one who'd been cast aside for 2 decades, knew better. My father and Lucas never did anything that didn't benefit them. I needed help. And I knew exactly who to call. 3 days later, inside a quiet cafe overlooking Lake Union, Julia Perez sat across from me, holding a small espresso, her eyes sharp and calm like she'd never once dozed off during a Harvard law lecture. Julia was one of the best underground financial attorneys I'd ever met, and the only person I trusted not to flinch when this got too big. "What are they doing?" Julia asked, her voice cold as ice, not surprised in the least. "Asset diversion. Looks like they're prepping to sell the company," I said, pulling up diagrams of fake accounts on my laptop. Julia studied everything for so long it made me nervous. She finally exhaled and said quietly, "Cora, this isn't just moving money. This is a full erasure strategy. If you don't act now, in 1 month your name will vanish from every ownership structure." I clenched my fist. "They're trying to wipe me from the entire system. Not just you. The research funds, the patents under your mother's name, they're all part of the revalued asset group," Julia said, staring directly at me. "They're planning to sell everything to Nordic Chem." My head shot up. Nordic Chem? The Swedish pharmaceutical giant. That's the one. They've already taken over 3 research companies in Texas using this exact playbook. Drain the patents, fire the staff, and dissolve the original identity. I sat there in silence, my heart pounding. Everything I had built my entire life, the diagnostic solutions that help thousands of patients catch deadly diseases early, was about to be exchanged for an investment handshake. Julia looked at me, placing her hand on the table. "You've got 2 choices. 1, stand by and watch it all disappear. 2, flip the board, but it has to be from the inside." I looked at her. "I'll take the second option." Julia smiled. "Then you'll need a hacker. And I think you already know who." I didn't need to think. Miles Weaver. 3 days later, I found Miles in the basement of an old building in Tacoma. He looked the same. Messy hair, dark circles under his eyes from lack of sleep, sipping coffee from a paper cup with a Starfleet logo. I'd gone to MIT with Miles. He was the only person I knew who could rewrite an internal security protocol with just 3 lines of text. "Cora Bennett." Miles leaned back in his chair with a smirk. "You're here about the Bennett family's financial stunt, aren't you?" I didn't ask how he knew. I just opened my laptop and showed him the transaction map I'd extracted. Miles let out a low whistle. This isn't a stunt anymore. Can you trace the money back to its origin? I asked. Yeah. But it'll take time. And I'll need access to the deep transaction layer, the one only the CEO has. I looked at him and smiled faintly. I have that access. They don't know it, but my mother left me an emergency token when she was still a co-founder. Miles paused for a few seconds, then nodded. Then let's go big. Over the following weeks, the three of us, the only people I truly trusted, began reconstructing a reverse blueprint. The diverted assets, the scattered shares, the voting rights secretly adjusted through documents my father had signed with affiliate parties. And after 3 weeks, Julia uncovered something that made my blood run cold. A preliminary agreement, stamped with Nordicchem's seal, clearly stating the entire company would be merged and renamed Nordic Roads International. Any department not deemed commercially viable would be liquidated. Below that, in bold print, sole and lawful heir, Lucas Bennett. No mention of me. No mention of my mother. Not a single word acknowledging my existence in this company. I looked at Julia, then turned to Miles. No one said anything. The air felt like a storm compressed beneath the earth, waiting for the moment it would burst. I stood up. My voice wasn't loud, but it was firm. This is where we launch our counterattack. Ever since I saw that preliminary agreement with Nordichem, I stopped feeling angry. What took its place was something strange. A calm, razor-sharp clarity. Maybe it came from my mother. Maybe it was from years of being second to everyone. But I wasn't going to disappear. I returned to Seattle and spent the entire night in my quiet apartment, reopening the file my mother had left behind. Inside was an old, yellowed document clearly labeled, Emily Bennett Trust, to be used only if necessary. Independently protected from Bennett Roads shares. At the bottom were her handwritten signature and a confirmation from an independent law firm in Vermont. I remembered her words. If you're better than your father thinks, you'll need your own exit door. Now I understood she didn't just leave me love. She left me the means to save myself. I called Julia. She came the next morning with an encrypted laptop and 3 sample contracts. We'll create a chain of parent and subsidiary companies. Each company will be represented by a proxy with no public ties to you. They'll begin acquiring shares from longtime shareholders, the ones your father neglected and who've wanted out for years. I nodded. We need at least 51% to control voting rights. Julia smiled lightly. How busy do you think your brother and father are with this company sale? Busy enough to not notice who's buying back shares bit by bit, I replied. Miles handled security monitoring and rerouted all IP activity so any transaction related to me was encrypted through multiple layers of intermediaries. Each shell company had a harmless-sounding name like Silverpath Holdings, Everhart Equity, or Lumen Biotech Trust. The registration addresses were scattered across states: Oregon, Montana, Colorado, all with independent legal representatives. We started with small shareholders. Doctors who had invested in Bennett Roads in its early days, people who'd been pushed aside when Lucas took over the media narrative. I approached them, not as Cora Bennett but as Clara Rhodes, an executive representing an investment group interested in humanitarian medical technology. I remember meeting Dr. Raymond Caldwell, a retired physician who once held 2% of the company. He squinted at me. You look familiar. Have we met before? I smiled. Maybe at the Medical AI conference in Boston last year. I gave a talk on stratified patient data. He nodded. Ah, that was a good one. Not like that marketing fluff your brother spits out. I didn't argue. I simply placed the buyout proposal on the table, 15% above market value. He looked at me for a long while and sighed. I'm tired. Her father once promised something, medicine for the people. Now all they talk about is profit. If you're really doing something different, I'll sign. That was the first share. And the first time I felt like I was stepping into a fight that truly mattered. 2 months later, I owned, through intermediaries, 17.4% of the company. Julia whispered while reading the report, "You're on the right path. Lucas hasn't noticed a thing." I kept playing the engineer. Still received system coordination emails. Still got half-baked assignments from Lucas's assistant. Once, after submitting a report optimizing patient record algorithms, he replied with just 3 words, "Send to team." That same afternoon, I bought an additional 4% stake from a small investment group in Chicago. I learned to smile when Madeline posted event photos with my father on Instagram, captioned, "Creative Family." I learned to bow my head in tech meetings just to listen to Lucas announce an innovation I had written 8 months earlier. I learned to swallow bitterness and keep a calm face at every fake compliment my father handed to others, never once saying my name. And I learned to strike back, with patience. By week 12, Julia found a loophole in the shareholder charter. If there was a sudden shift from legacy shareholders, anyone with at least 1% ownership could call for a strategic adjustment session. No CEO approval needed. I stared at that line in the document and asked softly, "That clause still holds?" Julia nodded. They never expected anyone to invoke that clause. Because they assumed no one would be patient enough. I sat silently in the 6th-floor office I'd rented in an old building near Fremont, staring at the photo of my mother above my desk. In it, she held the very first blueprint I ever gave her, the one that was never officially recognized. "You once told me to create my own light," I whispered. "I will. But you'll be the first to see it." Then I turned back to the screen. There was still so much to do. But I was no longer the shadow behind the curtain they built. I was the one rewriting the script, line by line, clause by clause, step by step, under the very lights they believed shined only on them. Richard Bennett's 65th birthday party was exactly what he loved: dazzling, extravagant, and dripping with power. The crystal chandeliers hanging from the high ceiling cast a warm golden glow across the grand estate ballroom. Designer suits, glittering evening gowns, and French wine swirled together in a waltz of luxury to the soft strains of a live cello. I stood quietly near the walnut-wood bar, a glass of water in hand. On stage, Lucas was delivering his speech, smiling with calculated charm, each word aimed to impress the investors and partners crowding the room. "My father built this empire," Lucas declared, resting his hand gently on Richard's shoulder as he sat in the front row. "And now we're preparing for a new chapter, a chapter of global reach." I knew exactly what that chapter meant. As the applause rolled like waves through the hall, I slipped away from the crowd and walked down the corridor toward the library, my father's private space for entertaining trusted associates. I hadn't planned to interrupt anything. Something just pulled me there. And when I stopped in front of the heavy wooden door, slightly ajar, I heard my father's voice. "Just make the announcement 2 days after the party," he said. "Nordic Chem is ready. The preliminary contracts are signed and the funds are laundered. Lucas, you just need to make sure she doesn't cause trouble." I froze. A pen clicked. Lucas spoke in a lower voice. "What about Cora's shares? She's been quietly buying them up. It's not something we can ignore anymore." "I've taken care of it," my father replied sharply. "One push and she's out of the structure completely. She's nothing. Invisible. Just like her mother." I stepped through the door, my voice calmer than I expected. "That's unfortunate. Because I heard everything." The two men turned around. Richard rose immediately. His eyes held no surprise, only the same cold disdain I'd known my whole life, now sharpened with contempt. "This is a private conversation," he snapped, each word like a blade. "Leave." I took one step closer. "You're planning to sell the entire company, the very platform I built line by line, system by system. And you never said a word to me." Lucas looked at me, smirking faintly. "Cora, don't turn this into a tragedy. Everyone has their role. You're the engineer. The big stuff, it's not for you." I didn't answer. I reached into my purse and pulled out a brown envelope, placing it on my father's desk. Inside are the signed transfer contracts from the primary shareholders. The legal holding companies are all under my control. I locked eyes with him. "I own 61%. The room seemed to freeze, like someone had just cut off the final note of a symphony mid-play. Richard grabbed the envelope, pulled out the documents, and flipped through the pages. His expression shifted, from dismissal to tension to a furious red. "This is fake," he growled. "Who do you think you are?" "I'm the one who quietly gathered the very pieces you and Lucas thought no one cared about," I said. "And you can check right now. The company's financial systems have been locked since 10 this morning." Lucas barked. "What the hell did you do, Cora?" I didn't answer. I tilted my head toward Richard. "You want to sell everything? Check your account." What happened next moved like a storm. Richard Bennett, always poised and polished in the media, suddenly lunged and shoved me hard in the chest. I staggered back a step. But he didn't stop. He grabbed my arm and squeezed so tightly I felt the crack of bone, then shoved me with such force that my back slammed into the glass wall at the far end of the room. The glass held, but I collapsed onto the marble floor. The edge of a table caught the back of my head, hard enough that my ears rang and warm liquid trickled from my scalp down to my cheek. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just lay there under the golden chandelier light, blood pooling red across white stone. From the main hall, guests began to look toward the library. I saw a woman still holding her champagne glass pull out her phone and begin recording. Lucas panicked, rushing forward to pull his father back. "Dad. Stop it." Richard stood frozen, panting like an animal trapped in a corner. "You're not my daughter. You're Emily's mistake. I should have let you die." I forced myself upright, pain throbbing at the base of my skull, my mouth full of iron. But I smiled. "You're right. You should have." I wiped the blood from my cheek, my voice hoarse but steady. "Now check your accounts." Time stopped. Lucas pulled out his phone. The glow of the screen lit up his pale face. Notifications popped up one after another. Access denied, transaction failed, ownership transferred. He stammered, "This can't be." I sat back against the table leg, breath shallow and heavy, blood from the wound dripping onto the cold stone. In that moment, surrounded by whispers, flashing lights, and staring eyes, I knew there was no turning back. Lucas stared at his screen as if praying the system messages were just a glitch. But the words were clear: assets transferred. Every bank account, every property ID, all now listed under the Emily Trust. My trust. I stood slowly, wiped the blood off my cheek. My hand was red, but it didn't shake. I turned toward the open doors, where at least 10 phones were held up, recording. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, voice still hoarse from the impact but unwavering, "I'm sorry for the disruption at tonight's event. But maybe it's time we all saw the truth." From my coat pocket, I pulled out a notarized copy of the shareholder transfer agreement and raised it. Julia had prepared everything meticulously, every signature, every clause bulletproof. "I am the majority shareholder of Bennett Rhodes," I said, each word deliberate. "And according to the shareholder agreement signed in 2001, I now hold full authority over all corporate assets, including this estate, the vintage car fleet, the Gulfstream G650, and the commercial real estate portfolio currently under company ownership." The crowd gasped. Some glanced at each other in confusion. I spotted Mr. Peterson, my father's former best friend, pull out his phone and call someone. Probably his lawyer. Richard remained motionless, like stone. But his eyes no longer burned with rage. They were cold. Cold like the night I overheard him call my mother a danger. Lucas snapped, "You have no right to speak here. This is my father's house. You're just a freeloader." I turned to look at him and my eyes no longer held any tolerance. "Lucas," I said calmly, "you can check the Virginia Property Registry. This estate was purchased 3 months ago through the Clara Rhodes Holdings Fund, which merged into the Emily Trust this morning. You can call your lawyer. If you still remember their name." Madeline stepped forward from the crowd, her hands trembling slightly, her lips pressed together like she was fighting herself. "Cora," she whispered. But I shook my head. "Don't say anything right now. Everything is being recorded." A young reporter from MedTech Review, who'd been invited to cover Lucas's so-called AI innovation announcement, approached with a recorder. "Bennett, may I ask, when was the transfer of ownership executed? And are you officially declaring a restructuring of the entire corporation tonight?" I answered plainly, "The transfer was executed legally over the past 8 months. And yes, I will be announcing a restructuring of Bennett Rhodes to refocus on public health care, partially converting the RD division into a nonprofit and restoring the vision my mother laid before she passed." An older woman from the guest list, someone I vaguely remembered as the wife of Dr. Evans, one of the earliest investors, stepped forward. She looked at Richard, then at me. "Emily once told me, my daughter will bring medicine back to the people who need it. She was right." I didn't reply. I simply bowed my head to her. Police arrived in less than 10 minutes, responding to a call Julia had placed before I even stepped into the library. They didn't arrest anyone immediately. They simply began taking statements, citing a report of domestic violence in a public space. One of the officers looked at me, noticing the blood still seeping from behind my neck. "Do you need medical assistance?" he asked. I shook my head, speaking evenly. "I'll go to the hospital after this is done. But I want an official report filed tonight. Everything is on video. And I want it on record." One officer nodded. "Understood, Ms. Bennett." I turned to my father. "Do you want to know what it feels like to be erased from the picture you created?" Richard gave a dry laugh, his voice brittle as paper. "You think you've won because of a few signatures? You don't even know what the real game is." I didn't respond. I simply said, "Maybe not. But at least I'm not the kind of man who beats his daughter and calls himself a great founder." As I stepped out of the grand hall, my legs slightly unsteady from the blood still soaking into my collar, I saw the crowd of reporters already gathered outside the gates. News traveled faster than any algorithm ever could. On a videographer's phone screen, I caught a glimpse of the headline: "Cora Bennett, unknown engineer or queen who toppled a medical empire?" I didn't care much what they called me. All I knew was that from that moment forward I was no longer the shadow in the Bennett house. I was the owner. And they were the trespassers. 3 nights after the estate event, I woke up at 3 a.m. to a message. The number was unfamiliar, not saved in my contacts. The message had only 8 words, no exclamation points, no emojis. But it made my spine turn to ice. "Your mother didn't die in an accident. Ask Lucas." I sat up straight, the glow of the phone screen slicing across the ceiling like a blade. I read the message 3 times. That last line, "Ask Lucas," tightened my chest like a vice. My mother died when I was 16. A car crash on a winding road in Northern Virginia on a rainy evening. The car skidded off the road and hit an old oak tree. No witnesses. No traffic cameras. The official conclusion: lost control due to wet conditions. I had accepted that. Because I had no reason to question it. Because I was just a kid who lost her mom with no right to ask, why? I called Julia the next morning. She arrived at my place within 30 minutes, no makeup, carrying her laptop and 2 thick folders. Miles showed up too with coffee in hand. He set the cup on the table, looking at me through red, sleepless eyes. "That message could be real. Or it could be bait," Julia said. "But if you want to reopen the crash." "I don't want to," I cut her off, my voice dry. "I need to." Miles opened his laptop, typing quickly. In under 5 minutes he had pulled the original crash report from the state's digital archives. I sat still, eyes unblinking, as the blurry old photographs appeared on screen. A silver Toyota Camry, front end crumpled, front wheels twisted at unnatural angles. "See anything unusual?" Julia asked. Miles squinted at the bottom of the report. "It's signed by a state investigator named Harold Coulson. But there's no original case ID. No digital scene data attached. Just a narrative." I looked at Julia. "What does that mean?" She tilted her head. "It means the report might have been altered. The original file could have been pulled from the state system." Miles nodded. "I'll trace it through the insurance records. Harder to falsify those." He launched another interface and dug into records from my mother's old insurance provider, Hamilton Life Auto. As he searched, Julia opened the family's paper archives and handed me a photocopy of the insurance contract my mother signed back in 1999. "This states clearly, in case of death by unknown cause, the insurer must conduct an independent investigation," Julia said. "So, where's that report?" Miles straightened in his chair, tension in his back like a tightened wire. "Found it." He pointed to the screen. The initial claim was assigned to an independent investigator named Michael Porter. But the case is marked incomplete. The last note says, "Investigator unresponsive after week 3. File closed pending." "Unresponsive." I whispered. "You mean, missing?" "Looks that way," Miles nodded. "No further communication. They sent 3 emails and a letter. No reply." A few months later, the company approved the claim under accidental death. I stood up, walking to the window, my hand unconsciously grazing the fresh scar behind my head. a souvenir from the marble floor crash during the estate party. The pain still throbbed, but the ache inside went deeper. I remember my mom calling me that night. I said slowly, like I was tracing each breath. She said, "Cora, I found it. Tomorrow everything changes." But she never came home. The room fell silent. The only sound was the soft whir of the computer fan. "We need to find Michael Porter," Julia said. "If he's still alive." Miles nodded. "I'll start with his last known residence." I sat down again, eyes fixed on the screen. Inside me something shifted, like someone had turned every truth I ever knew upside down. If my mother didn't die in an accident, if someone made sure she didn't come back, then I couldn't live with the old answers anymore. I thought about my father's cold eyes that night. I thought about Lucas standing right beside him, silent as I collapsed, offering no hand, no word, no resistance. And that's when I began to understand, what they wanted to bury wasn't just money. They had buried a truth along with my mother, a truth I now had to dig up. Whatever it was. However much it would hurt. It took nearly a week before Julia secured clearance to access the old basement archive of Bennett Rhodes, the place where my father used to store original contracts and project records back when the company didn't have a legal division of its own. I went there with her in person, even though the room had been sealed for nearly 3 years after they switched to a cloud-based storage system. We had to sign 3 forms, scan our retinas, and pass through 2 layers of security to unlock a door that weighed nearly 1,000 pounds. Inside it was cold. The air smelled of rusted metal and old paper, like time itself had been sealed into those thousands of brown file boxes. Julia handed me a pair of rubber gloves and exhaled deeply. "We start with the first keyword, Emily." I began at shelf number 12, which held internal meeting notes from 1998 through 2001. It took me nearly 4 hours before I found a small unlabeled box at the very bottom, just a handwritten mark, EB, audio draft. I opened the lid and my hands froze. Inside was a black cassette tape and a small SD card, the kind used in handheld voice recorders from 2 decades ago. Miles arrived that night with audio signal converters. We inserted the SD card and a faint crackling sound filled the 19th floor conference room, where I had locked the doors, turned off all the lights and left only a soft beam from the projector lamp. My mother's voice came through after a few seconds of static. "September 13th, 10:42 p.m. I'm Emily Bennett. If anyone is hearing this, it means I can't deliver this in person." I clenched my fist. Julia placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Richard has done something." Her voice trembled but was clear. "They're using the company's transaction system to funnel money into shell corporations, some of them in the British Virgin Islands. I've been tracking it for 6 months and now I have proof." I heard her breathing, followed by the sound of paper rustling. "I'm sending this file to Cora first thing in the morning. If I don't make it back, give it to her." Then her voice dropped to a whisper. "Lucas knows I found out. He followed me last night. I saw the company SUV parked near my house at 9:15. No license plate." I looked up. My throat tightened. Miles typed quickly and pulled up a decrypted GPS log from company vehicles dated back to 2001. He had cracked the file the night before. One of the SUV test units had a signal near Emily's neighborhood on that exact date, he said. Location data shows the vehicle parked near a gas station about 10 minutes after the crash. Julia opened a new document she had just retrieved from the old legal department. An internal memo between my father and the head of company security at the time. I took it in my hands. The typed line read coldly. "Emily is becoming a risk. Restrict her access to original files. Keep Lucas in observation mode. Do not allow direct involvement." Below that was a handwritten note, the ink sharp and slanted. "If necessary, neutralize by any means." I don't remember how long I stayed silent. Maybe the whole room fell into a breathless stillness. Miles whispered, "I can extract video from the old traffic camera system. Some segments were archived that year. If the plate was blurred digitally, I might be able to recover part of it." I nodded. "Do it. Do everything." That night, I returned to my apartment. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't play music. I sat by the window, the printed memo still in my hand. My mother had known. She had prepared everything for me, trust funds, system access, and even the final proof. But she never got the chance to hand it over. They silenced her. And they let me live inside that lie for nearly 20 years. Now I understood, I wasn't just reclaiming a company. I was digging up a grave. One that didn't just hold my mother, but the conscience of everyone who shared her blood. That night, rain tapped gently against the glass of the 34th floor, where I often stayed the latest. Seattle, late December, hadn't seen much snow like previous years, but the cold had a way of piercing straight through bone. I stood by the window, ginger tea in hand, eyes drifting across the city lights, lines of red tail lights weaving like thread through the dark. Julia had left an hour earlier to meet with federal agents. Miles was in the next room, pretending to finish a report while actually monitoring cell phone signals across the area. We were ready. Exactly 48 hours earlier, I had submitted a full report outlining Richard and Lucas's financial fraud and money laundering scheme to the Federal Financial Crimes Office. Their response came faster than I expected. A team of investigators had already embedded themselves in the company as independent auditors. The federal court had approved covert surveillance and issued a preliminary asset freeze. Everything had been set like a chessboard. And tonight I was the last pawn standing in their path. At exactly 11:07 p.m. the private elevator stopped. I didn't have to look to know who it was. Only one person still had access to the executive floor after hours. Lucas walked in without knocking. Same expensive suit, pale gray tie, polished black shoes. But this time he wasn't wearing his usual smugness. His face was tight like a wire about to snap. "We need to talk," he said flatly. I nodded and motioned to the chair across from me. A folder sat on the table, not for him to read but for the FBI to see that I was following protocol. "What brings you here?" I asked calmly. Lucas stared at me for a long moment, then placed both hands on the table trying to appear composed. "Maybe we've all gone too far. Everyone has their rights and wrongs. What happened to Mom? Nobody wanted that. But if you withdraw your claims now, we can restructure. Share the board. Co-lead." I didn't reply right away. I tilted my head slightly, meeting his eyes. "Are you negotiating for the company, or trying to soften the blow because you know what's coming?" Lucas gave a weak laugh. "What evidence do you even have? A few old tapes and conspiracy theories? You really think the government moves over something like that?" I stood, walking toward the glass wall with my back to him. "Not just a few claims. I've got 3 verified backups, 5 witness testimonies, 18 flagged transactions with your digital fingerprint and Dad's, and a security camera showing the company SUV parked 30 yards from the crash site where my mother died." I heard the chair scrape hard behind me. Lucas stood. "Are you threatening me?" I turned. The overhead light cut across his face like a shadowed mask. "No. I'm warning you. If you walk out that door, you might still retain some dignity when the cuffs go on. But if you choose the old way, the way Dad taught you, then..." I didn't get to finish. The door burst open. 3 unfamiliar men entered the room without saying a word. One locked the door while the other 2 stood behind me, blocking both sides. Lucas raised a hand. "Don't hurt her. We just want to talk in private." I looked back toward Miles, sitting in the server room across the hall, visible through the one-way glass. He gave a subtle nod. The signal had been sent. The FBI was closing in. I took a slow breath. "I think you should reconsider your definition of talking." One of the men stepped forward and reached toward me. But before he could touch my sleeve, the door slammed open near the elevator. "Nobody move." The federal agent's voice rang out clearly. The door burst open and a team of 6 in dark navy uniforms rushed in, fully armed. One grabbed Lucas's arms while another pinned the 2 men to the ground. I stepped back, leaning against the desk. Lucas was forced to his knees, hands cuffed behind him, face pale. "You set me up," he hissed. I didn't respond. But Julia stepped forward, presenting a court-issued arrest warrant. "Lucas Bennett," she said coldly, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, international money laundering, and tampering with evidence in the death of Emily Bennett." Lucas turned his face away, but I saw the tears at the corners of his eyes. Not from remorse, but because he knew, this time it was really over. The other 2 men were escorted out. One of them, as he was handcuffed, cried out, "I was just following Mr. Richard's orders." I looked at Julia. "He knew about this?" She nodded. "The FBI just confirmed it. He gave direct orders." They found evidence in the safe at the estate. A plan to eliminate internal threats. Your name was on it. I let out a quiet laugh, though I could feel my heart turning cold. Good, I whispered. Then let's start here. The Western District Federal Court of Washington held its first hearing on a Monday morning during an unusually gloomy spring. It wasn't raining, but the sky remained overcast from the moment I stepped out of the car until the heavy wooden courtroom doors closed behind me. Reporters had lined up early. Some even brought folding ladders for better camera angles when we arrived. They shouted my name, Lucas's name, and even my father's, like this was some kind of miniseries, but I didn't look back. I walked straight in, face bare of makeup, hair neatly tied back, and in my hand the handwritten statement from my mother. The trial lasted more than 6 months. 6 months filled with overlapping testimonies, stacks of evidence packed into dozens of document boxes and storage drives. I sat every day in the front row for key witnesses, next to the lead prosecutor and the federal investigation team. I never missed a day. I reviewed every minute of surveillance footage from 2001, every financial transaction, every photo my mother had kept. Each shattered memory was pieced back together, systematically, legally, and finally with weight. Richard made his first appearance in court wearing a charcoal suit and a gaze stripped of arrogance. He remained silent through most of the proceedings, only occasionally whispering to his lawyer. But on the 43rd day, when my mother's voice recording played in the courtroom, he lowered his head, eyes on the floor, and never looked up again. Lucas was different. At first, he denied all charges, blaming poor decisions under family pressure and misguided influence from his father. But when the FBI presented enhanced traffic camera footage showing the company SUV parked 30 yards from my mother's crash site that night, he went silent. On the 78th day, Lucas formally changed his plea. I sat just 3 rows away when he read his confession aloud in court. His voice cracked when he described that night, following my mother from her office, stopping the car behind hers along the mountain road. I listened to every word. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat quietly as if I had known this all along. On the 103rd day, Madeline appeared. I didn't know she was coming. I didn't know she'd sit with the prosecution as a witness. When she entered the courtroom wearing a simple beige sweater and no lipstick, the room fell silent. Richard stared at her without blinking. Lucas lowered his head. Madeline walked directly to the witness stand, placed her hand on the Bible, and answered, "I swear to tell the truth." She testified about hidden internal meetings, how our father forced her to sign money transfers she wasn't allowed to read. She testified about how he created fake charities to legitimize finances, how Lucas passed IT data for secret deals. But more than anything, she testified about how for years our father controlled her, financially and psychologically. He told me, Madeline said, that if I didn't stay quiet, I would die just like Mom. I closed my eyes at those words. Not out of pain, but because in that moment I knew I wasn't alone anymore. In the end, the jury delivered the verdicts. Richard Bennett, life in prison without parole for orchestrating murder, international money laundering, falsifying evidence, and abuse of power. Lucas Bennett, 35 years in prison with reduced sentencing due to full confession and cooperation with federal authorities. Madeline Bennett, no criminal charges due to her limited role and key testimony. She was ordered to participate in a long-term psychological recovery program. After the verdict, I stepped out of the courthouse under a rare glimmer of June sunlight. Reporters lifted their cameras again, shouting questions, calling me the new face of corporate justice, or the once unknown engineer who brought down an empire. I didn't answer. I just walked to my car, opened the door, sat down, and exhaled deeply. I didn't feel relief. Only quiet. 3 days later, I was officially named Chief Executive Officer of Bennett Rhodes, by unanimous vote of the board. No flowers. No champagne. No speeches. Just one email I sent to every employee with the subject line, "We begin again. From the start. From truth." Madeline sent me a handwritten note. No name, just one final line. "I don't deserve a second chance, but if you'll let me do something useful, I'll spend the rest of my life making it right." I offered her the role of director for the new Women's and Workplace Survivors Program, a project I was building alongside the restructuring of the company. She accepted. No special requests. I'm not sure if Madeline and I will ever truly be sisters again. But at the very least, we're doing something right. And for the first time in nearly 2 decades, the banner bearing my mother's name, Emily Bennett, is no longer buried beneath a mountain of lies. Nearly a year after the final trial, Seattle entered one of those rare summer stretches where the sun felt soft instead of scorching. I had moved into a small penthouse in the north end of the city, nestled on the top floor of a renovated old building. The space wasn't large, but it was enough. For me and for the quiet I needed after 2 decades of living in shadows and noise that never belonged to me. I still ran Bennett Roads, but no longer from the headquarters. I worked remotely, through video calls, through morning reports, and through strategic decisions handled via a simplified management system that Miles and I redesigned together. The company no longer chased rankings or stock value. We re-registered as a non-profit healthcare organization with a clear mission: to develop affordable diagnostics and treatment technologies for low-income communities worldwide. Every time a shipment of breast cancer medication priced under $3 reached a small clinic in a struggling neighborhood of New Mexico, I felt a soft door quietly close inside me. No applause needed. No press coverage. Over the past year, I had used nearly all of my personal earnings, including the final round of dividends from the reserve fund before restructuring, to establish the Emily Foundation, a scholarship program dedicated to young women pursuing biomedical science, computer science, and artificial intelligence in medicine. I chose that name because my mother had never been credited in any of the company's records, even though she was the first to design the model for integrating clinical data into automated diagnostics. From now on, every student awarded the Emily Scholarship would carry part of her legacy forward, kindly, with integrity, and without noise. At the inauguration of the Emily Bennett Center for Applied Research in Bellevue, which would serve as headquarters for our open science projects, I wore a soft steel blue dress and stood on the wooden stage beside my new colleagues. Behind me hung a portrait of my mother, makeup-free, her head tilted in a quiet smile while standing in an old lab. The photo had been found in her personal archive box, one my father had never touched in nearly 20 years. I looked up at the photo and whispered to myself, I didn't forgive. But I chose right. Rest easy, Mom. Madeline was there that day too. She sat quietly in the last row, didn't speak, didn't step on stage. She now worked for a nonprofit that supports women escaping manipulative relationships at work and at home. She regularly sent me reports, sometimes signing off with a simple line, "Thank you for letting me begin again." I didn't respond to all of them. Some things are enough, simply knowing the other person is doing the right thing. Miles remained our technology advisor. He declined any executive title, only appearing when there were security issues or when I wanted to test new ideas. Julia transitioned to become the executive director of the Emily Foundation. She said, "I helped you reclaim justice. Now I want to help the next generation protect it." One early evening in August, as I sat reviewing the profiles of the first 10 students awarded the scholarship, I paused at one name: Samantha Liu, 18 years old, daughter of an immigrant nurse, who scored perfectly on her essay about AI and equity in medicine. She wrote, "I want to create a healthcare system that doesn't exclude anyone just because they're poor or silent." I looked up, my vision blurred for a moment. My mother had written something similar once. In a scribbled note I'd found buried among old papers, "Medicine only matters when it reaches the most vulnerable." And now what she left behind was no longer trapped in a box, locked in a safe, or buried beneath lies. It was alive again. In children I had never met. In women finally given power. In lines of code, in tablets of medicine, in classrooms we were building. And for me that was enough. For her. And for myself. I know that each of you listening to this story will walk away with different feelings. Some may feel heartbreak over betrayal from one's own family. Others may find hope in the fact that justice, though delayed, can still be delivered. But I believe that above all, what truly stays with us isn't revenge. It's witnessing how a person can rise from devastation and use their loss to build something meaningful for others. What about you? Have you ever felt like you were pushed out of the very place that was supposed to be your home? Have you ever asked yourself whether you're strong enough to forgive? Or if choosing another path is the only way to protect yourself? Leave your thoughts below. I truly want to hear your story, because who knows, maybe your words will become a light for someone else still trapped in the dark like I once was. And if you want to keep following stories that explore family, justice, forgiveness, and the truths time can't bury, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because some lives we thought were buried are just beginning to live again in ways no one could have imagined.